The day my grandmother died, my aunts were already in her house dividing up her jewelry before the funeral home had even come to collect her. I know this because I was there. I had driven 4 hours to be with her in her final days, sleeping in the guest room, holding her hand, reading to her when she couldn't sleep. I was the one who called the hospice nurse at 2 in the morning. I was the one who sat beside her when she took her last breath at 6:47 on a Tuesday. And while I was still sitting in that chair, still holding her hand, still in shock, my Aunt Renee walked into the bedroom and opened the jewelry box on the dresser. My name is Catherine, and what happened over the next 11 months is the story of how I found out that the people you grow up thinking are your family can become complete strangers the moment there is money involved. And how one document, one single document that nobody knew existed, changed everything. My grandmother, Eleanor Marsh, was 81 years old when she died. She had been a quiet woman her entire life, the kind of woman who made her own bread and kept her receipts in labeled envelopes and never once raised her voice at anyone in my memory. She had been widowed at 62 when my grandfather died of a heart attack, and she had managed the farm and the property and the finances entirely on her own for 19 years. The farm was the thing. 43 acres outside of Knoxville, Tennessee, with a farmhouse that had been in the family for 3 generations. It was not worth a fortune by any coastal standard, but by Knoxville standards, and by the standards of what land had become worth in recent years, it was worth somewhere between $800,000 and $1 million too, depending on who you asked. My grandmother had 3 children. My mother, Patricia, was the eldest. Then came Renee, who was 57 and lived 40 minutes away and visited my grandmother approximately 4 times a year, despite the short distance. And then there was my Uncle Douglas, who was 54, had twice declared bankruptcy, and whose relationship with money was the kind of relationship that made other people nervous. I am my mother's only child. My father left when I was 9. My mother worked as a school librarian for 31 years. We were not wealthy. We were not struggling. We were exactly the kind of people for whom an unexpected inheritance could genuinely change a life. Not in a lavish way, just in a breathing room way. A paid-off mortgage, a retirement that wasn't terrifying. I had spent more time with my grandmother than either of her other 2 children combined. I drove up every 6 weeks. I took her to her doctor's appointments when she stopped driving at 78. I helped her with her taxes, her insurance paperwork, her grocery orders. I was there when she fell in the kitchen in March and broke her wrist. I stayed for 2 weeks that time. I want to be honest. I did not do these things because I expected anything from her estate. I did them because I loved her, and because she was alone, and because it was the right thing to do. My mother did the same. She called every day, visited every few weeks, handled things from a distance when I couldn't be there. Renee and Douglas did not do these things. I am not saying this bitterly. I am saying it as a factual record of what happened. When the will was read, 3 weeks after the funeral, at an attorney's office in Knoxville, the room contained my mother, Renee, Douglas, myself, and 2 attorneys. The will divided the estate into 3 equal parts, 1/3 each to Patricia, Renee, and Douglas. Renee cried with relief. I saw it. She was trying to hide it, but she was not successful. Douglas immediately asked about the timeline for liquidating the property. My mother said nothing. She looked at her hands. I drove home that evening and sat in my kitchen and felt something that I did not expect to feel. Not grief exactly, and not anger exactly, but a kind of deep and quiet exhaustion. My grandmother had been equal in her distribution. That was her right. She had raised 3 children, and she had loved them equally, whatever their choices, whatever their distance. I understood that. What I did not understand, what nobody understood yet, was that the will we heard read that afternoon was not the last word. 6 weeks after the reading, I received a phone call from the estate attorney. His name was Gerald Forsyth, and he had a careful voice, the kind of voice that gives you information in precise portions. He told me that in the weeks after my grandmother's death, while going through her papers to finalize the estate, his office had discovered a second document, a codicil, an amendment to the will, that had been drafted and properly notarized 8 months before her death. My hands were very still on the table while he told me this. The codicil did not divide the estate into 3 equal parts. The codicil left the farmhouse and all 43 acres to me. Solely and entirely to me, Catherine Ann Marsh. My grandmother had used my full legal name. The liquid assets, her savings, her accounts, approximately $200,000, were to be split between her 3 children as originally specified. But the land, the farm, the house that had been in the family for 3 generations, that was mine. I asked him to repeat it. He did. I did not say anything for a long moment. Then I said, "Did she say why?" He told me she had. There was a letter attached to the codicil. He could read it to me or mail it. I asked him to read it. My grandmother's letter was 3 paragraphs long. I will not reproduce it word for word because it is mine and it is private, and some things belong only to the people they were written for. But I will tell you what she said. She said she had watched, in the final years of her life, which of her children and grandchildren showed up. Not for holidays, not for celebrations, but for the ordinary days. The hard days, the days when there was nothing to gain and everything to give. She said she had seen me in her kitchen at 2 a.m. making tea after her wrist surgery. She had heard me on the phone arguing with her insurance company for 45 minutes to get her medication covered. She had watched me sit beside her in silence when she didn't want to talk, which she said was its own kind of love. She said she had made her decision clearly and without regret, and that she hoped I would keep the land in the family and love it the way she had. That was all. I sat at my kitchen table for a very long time after Gerald Forsyth ended the call. Then I called my mother. My mother already knew. Gerald had called her first as the eldest child. She was quiet when she told me. Not resentful, something more complicated. She said, "She was right, Catherine. She was absolutely right." Renee and Douglas found out the same day. The next 72 hours were the worst I have experienced in my adult life. Renee called me 4 times. The calls began at reasonable volume and escalated. She used the word manipulated. She said I had manipulated a lonely old woman. She said I had been positioning myself for years. She said things about my mother that I will not repeat. By the 4th call, she was screaming. I did not scream back. I listened until she was finished, and then I said, "I'm going to hang up now. When you're ready to have a conversation, I'm here." Then I hung up. Douglas sent an email. It was 7 paragraphs long and contained the word lawyer 4 times and the phrase undue influence twice. His argument was that my grandmother had not been of sound mind when she drafted the codicil. I forwarded the email to Gerald Forsyth. Gerald told me that the codicil had been drafted at a meeting my grandmother had initiated herself, driving herself to his office. This was before she stopped driving. and that she had been assessed by the attending notary and 2 witnesses as fully competent. The document was airtight. What followed was 8 months of legal challenge from Douglas, funded in part, I later learned, by Renee. They hired an attorney. There were depositions. There were medical records subpoenaed. There was an argument made that my grandmother had been in cognitive decline. Her doctors testified otherwise. I want to tell you what those 8 months were like. I want to tell you because I think people who haven't been through this don't understand what family legal disputes actually cost. Not just in money, though they cost an enormous amount of money, but in the other things. I stopped sleeping well. I started rehearsing conversations in my head at 3 in the morning. Arguments I would never actually make. Defenses I would never actually need to give. I lost 8 pounds without trying. My work suffered. I had a relationship at the time, a man named Patrick, someone I had been with for 2 years, and the stress of those months put a crack in that relationship that it did not recover from. I drove to Tennessee 4 times during that period to meet with attorneys and once to walk the property, which I had not been to since my grandmother's funeral. I stood on the porch of the farmhouse on a gray October afternoon and looked at the 43 acres of land that 3 generations of my family had worked and lived on, and I thought, she trusted me with this. Whatever happens in that courtroom, she trusted me with this. I did not feel triumphant standing there. I felt the weight of it. The legal challenge was dismissed 11 months after my grandmother's death. Douglas's attorney filed a motion to appeal, which was denied. The estate was settled. The land was mine. Renee did not call me. Douglas did not call me. My mother called me. She cried. I cried. We talked for 2 hours about my grandmother, not about the will, not about the money, just about her. Her bread, the way she laughed, the particular smell of her kitchen. I have not spoken to Renee or Douglas since the settlement. I want to be honest about this. I do not know if I ever will. There are people who would say that family is family, that forgiveness is necessary, that my grandmother would have wanted reconciliation. Maybe she would have. I don't know. What I know is that I watched my aunt and uncle choose to spend 8 months and significant money trying to take something my grandmother had given me deliberately, clearly, and in her right mind. That is a choice they made, and I do not know yet if it is a choice I can forgive. What I do know is this. The farm is still standing. I drove up there last spring and spent a week clearing brush and having the old fences repaired, and sitting on that porch at dusk with a glass of iced tea, watching the light change over those 43 acres. A neighbor who has farmed the adjacent land for 20 years came over to introduce himself properly. He told me he had known my grandmother for 15 years. He told me she had talked about me. She said you were the one who showed up, he told me. I didn't know what to say. She was right, I finally said. I am not going to sell the farm. I have been asked. There have been offers, good ones. The land has appreciated exactly as much as people said it would. I have said no to all of them. I don't entirely know why, except that some things are not about money. Some things are about what you owe the people who trusted you. Some things are about showing up, not just for the hard days at the end, but for all the days that come after. Let me tell you about the house itself, because I think you need to understand what it is before you understand what it means. The farmhouse was built in 1931. My great-grandfather built it. His name was Thomas, and he was a man who believed things should be made to last. The walls are thick. The floors are original hardwood, worn down to a particular soft shine in the places where 3 generations of feet have walked the same paths. Kitchen to table, table to door door to porch. There is a window above the kitchen sink that faces east, and in the mornings, when the light comes through it, the whole room turns a specific shade of gold that I have never seen anywhere else. My grandmother painted the kitchen yellow in 1987. She told me that once. She said she had wanted a yellow kitchen her whole life, and one afternoon she drove to the hardware store and bought the paint and did it herself while my grandfather was at a cattle auction. And when he came home, he said it looked like sunshine and never complained about it once. She kept it yellow for 34 years. When I walked through the house after the settlement, the first time I walked through it as its legal owner, I stood in that yellow kitchen for a long time. I thought about her driving to that hardware store. I thought about doing something yourself, for yourself, because you wanted it, without asking permission. She was not a woman who talked about herself much. She did not tell stories about her own desires. But that yellow kitchen was there, and it told me something. I have decided to keep it yellow. The back bedroom, the one I always slept in when I visited, has a quilt on the bed that my grandmother made. She made it the winter after my grandfather died, she told me. She said she needed something to do with her hands. She said she sat in the living room every evening for 4 months with the pieces spread around her, and she just kept working. And when it was done, she felt like she had come back to herself. I understand that now better than I did when she told me. There is a barn that needs work. There are fences that are holding but won't hold forever. There is a well that the neighbor tells me has been reliable for 60 years, but that I should probably have looked at. There are 100 things that need attention and money and time. And I am one person with a full-time job and a 4-hour drive between me and Tennessee. I have started going up every month. I stay for 4 days. I have been learning, slowly and with a lot of mistakes, what the land needs. My neighbor James, the one who told me my grandmother talked about me, has been more patient with my ignorance than I deserve. He has shown me things about the land that I did not know. He has introduced me to the rhythm of it, what needs doing in spring, what to watch for in summer, what the land looks like when it is resting in winter. I did not grow up on a farm. I grew up in a suburb of Charlotte. I know nothing about land instinctively. Everything I am learning from scratch. But here is what I have discovered. Learning something from scratch, when you love the thing you're learning, is one of the best feelings in the world. I come home from those 4-day trips tired in a way that is completely different from work tired. It is body tired, good tired, the kind where you sleep deeply and wake up feeling like yourself. My mother came up with me in September. We stayed for 5 days. She cooked in that yellow kitchen every morning. She walked the property every evening. On the last night, we sat on the porch after dinner and she said, "She would be so happy right now." I said, "I know." We sat in silence for a while after that. It was the good kind of silence. I think about Renee and Douglas sometimes. I cannot help it. I think about what they chose, the attorney fees, the depositions, the 8 months of fighting something that was not going to change, and I try to understand it. I think about what it is like to watch someone else receive something you believed was yours, and I try to extend some compassion toward that feeling, because it must have been painful. But I also think about my grandmother driving herself to an attorney's office 8 months before she died, because she had made a decision and she wanted it done right. I think about her sitting across from Gerald Forsyth and telling him what she wanted and why. I think about the care she took, the clarity. She was not confused. She was not manipulated. She was an 81-year-old woman who knew exactly what she was doing and did it deliberately. She chose me, not because I was owed something, Not because the others were bad people, but because she had watched, and she had seen, and she had made her choice. I carry that with me every day. I carry it when I drive up to Tennessee and walk those 43 acres in the early morning before James arrives to help with whatever needs doing that weekend. I carry it when I stand at that east-facing window and watch the light come through and turn the yellow kitchen gold. I do not know what comes next for the farm. I do not know if I will eventually move there or find a way to work the land more seriously, or simply continue as a steward who shows up every month and does what she can. I do not need to know yet. What I know is that I will not sell it, and I will not neglect it, and I will try to be worthy of what she saw in me. 3 generations of my family built something on that land. My great-grandfather with his thick walls and hardwood floors. My grandmother with her yellow kitchen and her steady hands and her 19 years of managing it alone. Now it is my turn. I am not the same person I was before that phone call from Gerald Forsyth. The woman who answered that phone on an ordinary Thursday afternoon did not know what she was about to hear. She did not know that an 81-year-old woman had quietly, carefully made a decision that would upend her family and change her life. What I know now that I did not know then is this: the showing up was never wasted. Not one drive, not one early morning phone call, not 1 hour spent arguing with an insurance company or sitting in silence beside someone who just needed company. None of it was wasted. She saw it. She held it. She gave it back to me in the form of 43 acres and a letter I keep in my desk drawer and read sometimes when I need to remember why ordinary days matter. My grandmother's name was Eleanor. She made her own bread. She kept her receipts in labeled envelopes. She painted her kitchen yellow because she wanted to, and she never looked back. She taught me, in the end, more than she ever knew she was teaching me. I was watching, and she was watching me. And in the end, she made sure I knew that she had seen me. If this story hit something in you, if you've ever been overlooked, ever shown up when no one else did, ever wondered if it was worth it, it is. Subscribe, because every story on this channel is real, it is raw, and it is worth your time. And leave a comment below. Where in the world are you watching from? I read every single one.